I forget who it was. It was the governor of some US state who said, "Was if English was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me." Genius.
Well, there you go, everyone. That was the end of the punchline to the joke that Kevin just told. You just got to hear the end of it. If it's good
It
enough
wasn't
for
even a joke.
Jesus.
It was just a retelling of how stupid American
No,
politics.
do you think they want them to think cool things happen off air?
They do. We had a juggling monkey. It was amazing.
Yes. Right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Kristi and Kevin's Angry Hour this week. We're going to start with the worst story and then do less worst stories as we go on. So because of the somber nature, sorry, I should introduce my co-host or we're co-hosts. You're like half the show. It's not a happy hour if he's not here. Kevin, hello. How are you doing?
I'm down, if I'm honest. I'm a little bit down. Bad news all around, isn't it? And a relative of mine died in the
I'm
early
so sorry
hours.
to hear that.
Not a particularly close relative. I hadn't seen them in a while, but still a little bit. And the fact that we're talking about, imagine that we've got the rape conviction thing coming up later, and that's like by comparison to the stuff that's coming first. That's a relatively like okay story, or that's a medium range story. That's why it's the angry hour rather than the happy hour.
Correct. We talked about doing it based on our first story, which is going to be the Toronto terrorist incident.
It was inappropriate to have a show called Happy Hour that kicks off with, people were murdered by a terrorist. Brilliant.
So
anyway,
yes, Kevin, you're going to be taking the lead on this one. So go ahead and tell the audience the background and your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, for those who don't know, if you've been living under a rock, on Monday afternoon, a turd dressed up in a human suit by the name of Alek Minassian rammed his rental truck into pedestrians on the sidewalk, or pavement as we call it here in Britain, in Toronto, Canada, killing 10 people and injuring 14 more. He was immediately taken into custody and was later charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder and 14 counts, well, 13 initially, and then another one came along, 14 counts of attempted murder. The perpetrator of this fucking evil terrorist act was an incel, which might be a new phrase to certain people. It's a shortening, a portmanteau and shortening of involuntary celibate, which is basically someone who can't get fucking laid, which is, I've contended for a long time, is the core of so much of the manosphere more broadly. And the incel community is a small subset of the manosphere. Which is very, very extreme, even by the standards of your average kind of MRA or PUA. The incels are particularly extreme, with violent fantasies enacted, via text, via word, against women largely. And one sort of overwhelming theme is praise for the Isla Vista misogynist killer Elliot Rodger. And indeed, Minassian himself sent out a Facebook message shortly before actually committing this terrorist act, which on Facebook, which read, quote, "The incel rebellion has begun. We will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. All hail the supreme gentleman, Elliot Rodger," unquote. And for those who don't know, Chads and Stacys Chad is basically a male who has sex, and Stacys are females who have sex. Because they're in such a strange world that people who have sex need their own sort of monikers, which is very odd. So clearly a really, really vicious, nasty, violent, misogynist piece of shit, which you would imagine, therefore, the fact that most of the victims were women, most of the victims of the terrorist act were women, that would be enough. You put 2 and 2 together and you're going to get 4. But unfortunately, even given the misogynist past of Minassian, the authorities are still yet to accept that this was a targeted attack against women, even though, like I say, most of the victims were women. It seems he specifically targeted that group on the sidewalk, based on, obviously, the fact that he considered them to be female, and his violent misogynist beliefs. And it's absolutely terrible to say, "I told you so," but I can't help but say, not just me, but me, Kristi, and various other people in our community, we told you so. For a long time, the MRAs, the PUAs, the incels, various other fucking MGTOWs, all these wankers, have been stoking fires underneath very vulnerable people, and eventually some of them are going to crack. We've seen the sort of pipeline of misogynist evil moving people from those communities toward neo-Nazi groups. We've seen the fact that violent fantasies have been absolutely tolerated on places like 4chan, which was also mentioned in his Facebook post. I didn't read out the full thing because it had lists of numbers and stupid shit. And now we have an actual terrorist incident where 10 people were murdered. If this had been a Muslim, the news would not have stopped on this. The fact that it's a white guy, yeah, means that you won't really hear about this much until, like, it's a pretty open and shut case. He'll be convicted unless they plead insane, and then you never know. But yeah, we told you that this was likely to happen. If you allow this kind of violent misogyny to just go unchecked, as it has done for many years now, these things are going to happen. It happened with Elliot Rodger in Isla Vista. It's happened yet again.
From some of the coverage I read, I saw that there were boards on Reddit that hosted incels and that they had been closed down.
Yes, the R incel had been closed down about a month ago, if I recall correctly. That was a trove into madness. If you ever, I only went on there briefly a couple of times, and like I say, it's the enablement of violent fantasy. That's what's enacted there consistently, and that's thankfully why eventually we shut down. But it took so long to shut it down. These are some very, very dangerous young men who, like I say, the kinds of people I've made videos about. In the same way that did you see in the week that Ben Shapiro was named specifically by the prosecutor in the case of the Alek Minassian, the Quebec mosque terrorist?
Yeah.
Ben Shapiro was named specifically by the prosecutor in that case as having radicalized, along with other people, of course, sure, but having radicalized Bissonnette to hatred of Muslims. And in the same way as that, I think the people I've talked about on my channel for the last 3 fucking years now have been lighting fires underneath these young men. And eventually one of them's going to explode. And we've seen that, like I say, we've seen it with Elliot Rodger, and we've seen it with Minassian now.
It's a form of radicalization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, screaming it's a fucking feminist system and blaming Lacey Green for the terrorist activities of Elliot Rodger, for me, is no different than some radical preacher in a mosque saying everything that in your life is down to X, the Jews, the Westerners, the decadence, all of that. It's exactly the same playbook, but with different words.
And this is, it's such a tragedy, and it's a tragedy for the people who died, but it's a completely unnecessary situation because, as you say, this person was spinning out of control. He's in he was online communities that weren't de-escalating his situation. Yeah. They feed off of grievance and alienation and othering, dehumanizing, and forming bonds over it. Not a hashtag, not all incels, but there's clearly a portion of your community. I don't know everyone who identifies as an incel, or if there's
that's the thing. Generally speaking, you do say a hashtag, not all, because it's not all. But actually, I've genuinely yet to see anyone involved in the incel community who isn't, to at least a relatively minor extent, a violent misogynist. Someone who you would not be surprised if their name cropped up in one of these stories in the future. They're genuinely very worrying, angry, bitter, twisted young men.
Well, I will defer to your expertise because this is your wheelhouse and you know the community and you've been immersed in it far longer than I have. So.
Yeah, and I don't mean to sort of pull rank on you there. No, I genuinely haven't. Like you say, I've searched through these people now for years, and like I say, even within the community, like you would say, not all MRAs are like Paul Elam.
Yeah, not every person who advocates for men's rights is Paul Elam. Lonely Wolf is a great example of a guy who's completely reasonable and cares about men's issues without framing it about hating women.
Who was that, Sarah?
Lonely Wolf.
Ah, yes, yeah, on Twitter, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're not all like that. But with the incel community, I genuinely haven't seen anyone who I wouldn't.
Oh, Kevin, your audio dropped out for me again. Sometimes,
I think it is. I think it is genuinely a phase of angry young mandom, if that makes sense. And most of them will go past it. Most of them will evolve beyond it. Although the misogyny may remain, at least the violent fanaticism will dissipate, which is at least something. But unfortunately for some of them, they essentially self-immolate on the altar of this kind of weird, and it is a weird kind of fantasy world they've created for themselves based on not just the radicalization, but the feeling of being owed sex by women. It really is the absolute distillation of toxic masculinity.
Also blaming women sort of no matter what the situation. Like whatever it happens, it seems to be the woman's fault.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, it's a point I've made before in many of my videos, that they set up the game so that women will always lose. That with the sexualization of women, if women dress too conservatively, they're prudes. If they dress too provocatively, they're sluts who are deserving of rape or whatever. If women come forward, then they're liars. If they come forward about, a case of rape or sexual assault or harassment or whatever, they're liars. And if they don't come forward and it subsequently comes out, they say, well, why didn't you go to the police? They set up the game so that women can never win. So, and again, this is a form of radicalization where it's essentially a self-fulfilling prophecy where women always lose, and B, it's constantly self-reinforcing the idea of victimhood in these young men, that women, and you saw it with Elliot Rodger perfectly, because he basically explained it, at least if you read between the lines, the feeling of entitlement, that these women weren't giving him the sex he felt he was entitled to, so he took it out on them. That's the thing. It's that self-reinforcing thing where women are always to blame and always at fault, so therefore it's the women's fault that you're not getting sex, rather than the fact that you need to work on you, rather than demanding sex off anyone.
The other thing that these cases are more rare than racially motivated mass shootings or attacks, but it is, I think, it's not as socially unacceptable to use misogynist language and slurs against women in my perception, as to say something racist. That women are more likely to just be called whores and expected to deal with it. And there's so I feel like there's and of course Black women and women of color have intersectionality, right? They're not only demeaned because they're women, but they're also not white. But in that way, I think misogyny tends to bubble along more under the surface of discussions about bigotry. And so in these communities, they're perhaps not seen as dangerous because they're just complaining about women, just.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you see what I mean?
And yes, I would think that's an absolutely valid point. And I think to add to that, and we've seen this with the kind of ironic, quote unquote, ironic Nazism of certain people, which hides the actual Nazism within their ranks. You see this with the manosphere in general. There's a cloud of misogyny, some of which is meant as humor, some of which is meant as kind of playing to the crowd or whatever. And inside of all of that, you have this absolute core of really nasty, vicious, violent misogyny, which is clouded by this much bigger ball of misogyny, if that makes sense. That they're able to skirt underneath that more obvious stuff, that more surface level stuff that people can see more readily.
Use the same language of it, but have more intense views.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like I say, it's when they'll do jokes and they'll defend. Oh well, you can't make a joke now without everyone getting offended. Well, I'm sorry, if you're making rape jokes, how is that any different? Or not how is it any different? How is it discernibly? How do you tell the difference between that and the actual rape advocate thing going on as well? Because you're essentially saying the same words. It's impossible to tell intent completely. But we know for a fact that there is intent amongst your group, and you have done nothing to try and filter it out.
Right. Using a racist slogan, for instance, and saying it's a joke. You have one person who's a white supremacist saying it's a joke, and another person who wants to say, no, I'm not a racist. It's just a joke. You can't tell from just what people say. They can tell, anyone can say it's a joke.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it can be a joke, and they can also be a racist. You know, for them, they might find that funny because they're a racist.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. The argument of it's just a joke is ridiculous and demeans the power of humor, because you might find it funny because you are actually fucking racist. That's not it's not even for me particularly controversial, that idea, but they'd see it as oh, it's just a joke, therefore it's fine. You can say absolutely anything, which I mean, under the law you can, certainly in America, but it's not whether you can, but whether you should. And these people don't seem to ever take that into account, even though they're some of the most easily offended people in the world.
There's a very good video out about jokes and the thesis, and I can't remember who did it. It was someone, it was a big person who does like movie stuff, but their premise was that every joke has a victim, and really popular comedians make themselves the victims of jokes. But I think as we come along in this discussion, maybe thinking about who is the victim of the joke is a good thing to keep in mind for later.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Do we want to, have you said your piece? I mean,
I
just
basically did my piece, yes, and hopefully now. Although one thing I will add, it was great to see discussion of what incel is and its place within the wider manosphere in really, really mainstream places like on CNN, the BBC, all of these different news networks. Because the more, I don't always agree with the concept of sunlight being the best disinfectant, but in this case it is, because the fact it's been hidden, because it's been allowed to curdle and deform into this evil fucking thing. Well, to its core, it's sort of evil, but it's broken young men being able to essentially self-reinforce in an echo chamber that has led to this kind of warping of their minds. And so to see people actually take this problem seriously, and hopefully those behind the scenes in positions of authority really start to take it seriously, then hopefully something positive can come of it.
Shall we move on to the other sexual, well, in this case, it's related to misogyny, but not with murdering women. In this case, it's raping them.
Yeah, exactly. It's violent sexual fantasies, but in a more direct sexual way, if that makes sense. Yeah.
We learned today that Bill Cosby was convicted of sexual assault, I think it was. Do you have the headline? I don't. I just saw it on my Twitter feed.
Oh, right. Hang on, I can get the thing back up.
But anyway, it was 3 counts of sexual assault. I'll just say that because that would, that for me, like assault there, rape.
You threw me a curveball, goddammit.
Sorry. Like, yes, he didn't
No,
have you.
it's not acceptable. I don't accept your apology.
Right.
This is war.
Screwing up on air. Yes, you're going to ask me for a reference later on. But yes, getting back to the story.
I'm issuing a fatwa against you. That's happened.
Against, yes, no more asking you for information during a show.
Exactly. What are you expecting me to just know stuff?
Things accurately? Yeah. My recollection is that he was convicted, faces up to 10 years on each of the 3 counts, but most likely if he serves time, he would serve like the 10-year sentence concurrently. So just one 10-year sentence. And it's taken a long time, but for the women have come forward, this is, some justice.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got the thing here. Where are we? Oh, why is my computer being so slow?
Because you're online, and is it wants to annoy you?
Yeah, he was found guilty on 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault.
Okay.
Yeah, and like you say, faces. Well, it says faces up to 30 years, but like you say, it might be. It's possible it would be concurrent. And to be honest, 10 years might see him off anyway because he's not young.
He's 80.
Pardon?
He's 80.
Yeah, exactly. So even 10 years in prison could see the back of him, which would be good. Yeah, it is some semblance of justice for some of the women involved in this. Hopefully, it gives some level of peace and comfort to all of the women involved in this to know that at least he's going to go to prison for this, assuming there isn't some sort of appeal, which
Well, he'll appeal, but
who knows?
the conviction is the first step, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is a big deal, and I'd just like to say again, it's horrific to have to say I told you so, but again, I told you so. Not only were not all of these women liars, as was claimed, but just to all of the usual suspects, the rape apologist, rape advocate scum out there. You've once again defended a rapist. Well done.
Right, and then moving on to another sexual assaulter. We said it was an angry hour this time.
Yeah.
You have a visitor coming to the Scepter, or the Emerald Isle, isn't that? Or Scepter Isle? What is that?
The Emerald Isle is
Ireland.
Ireland, yeah.
Yes. In June.
July.
Oh, is it July? Oh, then I can come and protest. Excellent. I thought I was going to be coming back from holiday. Yay! All right, I'm coming to London.
I did. I invited you via Twitter.
Oh, I missed that. My mentions have blown up.
Yeah. So I'll, yes, the horrific fucking multiple rapist, multiple cheat, multiple fucking fraud piece of shit, otherwise known as, unfortunately, as the 45th president of the United States.
I just call him Trump.
Hopefully not for too much longer, but who knows? Yes, he will be making a visit to Britain, planned for, unbelievably, the Friday the 13th of July. Literally, the devil comes to town on Friday the 13th. How apt. Yeah, he's going to come over. He's not going to get the full state visit. That was already announced a long time ago, which is fun. So he won't get to go to the palace and grab the Queen's pussy or anything. Which is good, I suppose. Although if I was Theresa May, I would definitely be wearing some sort of protective fucking shield. Yeah, but we will be going to Downing Street, and I will certainly be there. Hopefully, Kristi will join me.
Yes, we can have like a progressives reunion.
Yeah,
slash protest.
Hopefully, the loudest boo known to man.
Definitely.
Yeah, and it will be huge protest, absolutely unmitigated fucking. Anarchy, and yeah, so that will be a lot of fun. I'm actually thinking possibly of doing a kind of fan meetup maybe the night before or something in London, which would be good.
Can I come?
All 4 of my fans, if they want.
Yeah, 5, unless you were already counting me.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, that'll be fun. It's just a shame we have to host this god awful piece of garbage. But unfortunately, because Britain's doing the whole Brexit thing, we literally can't afford not to. As a nation, if America gives up on us, we're sunk.
But you need the trade deal right away.
Exactly, absolutely. And he's a big enough. This is the thing. He's not actually a businessman. He's just a big enough, blustery enough idiot who got a massive loan from his dad. So hopefully we can trick him into giving us a good deal. Who knows?
Well, Macron learned how to play him, so Theresa May should.
Well, Macron, absolutely. Macron knows how to play him like a fucking fiddle. It's brilliant. I think world leaders need to look at the way Macron deals with Trump, because he always gets concessions out of him every time. I think you probably have to just go in there and go, Donald, you're amazing. Oh my God, Donald, you're the best. Did you draw this house, Donald? This house that the people are taller than the house. It's out of crayons. Shit.
What a big boy you are.
Yeah, exactly. Your hair is amazing. That's fantastic.
The protest.
70-year-old man have hair with colour in it, you cunt. Wow.
It's the orange that rubs off on the pillow from the back of his neck.
Yes. Oh, he's such a detestable, loathable character on every level. Fuck him. But anyway, he's coming and I'm going to protest the shit out of him.
Oh, the counter protest is going to be such a party. It's going to be a party in the streets. Everyone's going to be so like happy and cool and chill and like into really progressive causes. And
well, yeah, but that's the thing. I can't wait to see the 4 Trump supporters in Britain turn up. And they really are. I hazard a guess that my fan meetup will get more people than the pro-Trump rally. You can almost guarantee it.
And you're just going to reserve like a booth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I'm gonna host it in a bus stop.
Oh, dodgy.
Yeah.
At least a fish and chips. Come on, right? Bus stop.
No.
A bus stop near a fish and chips.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we can smell it.
Near the chippy. Well, I could nip over to the chippy and get chips, and then come back and stand in the rain at the bus stop.
Oh, she knows all the fucking lingo. But anyway, on from multiple.
Do we have? Okay, all right. We
Just
needed a little break.
Nazi conviction story, brilliant.
Oh, great! You said the N-word. All right. Yeah. So Kevin did a lot of the front loading, the content in the front part of the show, but we left enough time to have what I hope is an interesting discussion about the Dankula conviction that came down this week. So actually, Kevin, you might know the details. Well, I think I know the details pretty well here, but do you want to go over the backstory from your perspective?
Hello.
Yeah. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I cut out for like 20 seconds.
All right. I was going to ask if you wanted to sum it up from your perspective, because I've got my view of it now. So set in my mind, I'd be interested in hearing what your perception of it is.
Oh, right. Okay. So the backstory. Man teaches his dog to Nazi salute to a certain phrase, which we've decided not to use on the show because it will be clipped out of context by fools. But let's just say it rhymes with smash the booze. Yeah, so he taught his dog to Nazi salute, and this video went viral. The Scottish police made a complaint, and he got taken to court. Unfortunately, I mean, I'm not in favour in general of that going to court. It seemed like something of a waste of time and money. But the fact that he didn't get a jury was a bit iffy. I'm not entirely sure why that was the case. But even so, yeah, he was then convicted back in like a month ago or so, and then he was sentenced 2 days ago to an £800 fine, which is what, $120, something like that, US. Yeah, so I mean, he's fine. The expected fucking 6 month imprisonment, which was the maximum. That's the thing. Like, people were going mad. Oh, he's going to get 6 months. No, he's not. Shut up. Yeah, so they don't get their martyr to bleat victim points off. And also the fact that it clearly, this shows the ridiculousness that you can be a racist white man on the internet and make a lot of money out of it. He got fined at £800, but has raised about £120,000, supposedly for the appeal against his conviction, which definitely won't cost £120,000 to run, because I mean, what unless he hires the most expensive lawyer in the fucking world or something. So yeah, he's done phenomenally financially well out of the whole deal.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
My understanding from reading the background was that people did complain to the police, and that was what kicked it off. But other than that, I agree with your assessment, your summing of the facts in the case, as it were, or the facts up until this point. So the premise of here is, as we said at the outset, I think, is there are a lot of videos that are being put out right now talking about how horrible this decision is and how unfair it is and how arbitrary and how it's the death of free speech. I'm going to, as I said, steelman the law, because I don't see anybody else doing that. Now, to declare, I am not a resident of Britain, so this law will not impact me, and I can in no way impact the law of Britain, so I can't, my opinion doesn't really matter. But what...
True, but I think it's interesting that you even have to have that caveat, because you obviously live in Germany, where you have much harsher laws against Holocaust denial and things like that.
Yes, and I don't feel oppressed.
Exactly, yeah. The German people can still say their shit. You still actually get German Nazis and things. That happens.
Yeah, and the question for me when I went in was, well, at first, it seemed to me that prison time was absolutely stupid in this case. I mean, mostly because it would be the waste of state resources, especially on a first offense. I mean, it seemed to me that the most, if he had, because he was convicted, that the best outcome, would be a fine, because it was a first offense. And a lot of times when you have a first offense for things, you get off with a fine, because it's a first offense. You're not a repeat offender until you do it more than once, right? Yeah. But so that was more my position coming into it. And I just said, well, he got a fine, and that seems reasonable considering he was convicted. And his troll fans started to push back on Twitter. And this has been going on for about 48 hours now. Now, I also have to say that I've been using this. Yeah,
they've been really enjoying a circle jerk frenzy over this. Absolutely.
Oh, and saying the same things over and over and over again.
Yes, yes.
But for me, it's good because I'm in a writing period. So what I do is I do like a chunk of writing, like 35 or 40 minutes of writing, and then I get tired, or I kind of finish that section and I'm not quite sure what to do in the next one. And then I'll just like have some debates and then get tired of that. But I'm forming arguments, you know, and I'm thinking, so I'm staying in the same mindset. So I've actually been really productive with writing in the last 48 hours because of this. So inadvertent sort of positive for me anyway. When I got pushed back, then I had to, you know, look into it more because I needed to be able to see if I was wrong and check whether or not it was actually reasonable. And so in the last 2 days, in particular, I've found 2 really good resources on this case, and I'll be showing them in a minute. One is the instructions to the prosecutors in Scotland on how to evaluate cases and implement it, what the criteria are, what the considerations are in the process. The other document, which is invaluable in this case, is the text of what the sheriff who decided the case read out at the sentencing.
And I love the way the Scottish legal system is set up. They have things like sheriffs and stuff.
Yeah, it's like the sheriff of Nottingham.
Exactly. In England, we haven't had sheriffs for like 500 fucking years or something.
It's so confusing. Like every time I want to say judge, I have to check myself.
And they say not proven rather than not proven.
Oh, do they? That I didn't know because I only look at the words. I don't hear them.
Exactly, yeah. Well, they will. They've got innocent, guilty, and not proven, which is pronounced not proven for some fucking reason. God damn it, Scotland! I love you, but it's ridiculous.
It is hard to understand y'all sometimes.
Even your posh people pronounce stuff wrong. It's ridiculous.
Right. So I guess that's basically the premise. And what I'm going to do is first go through the information that I found and explain to you what I've learned about the law and what I think is important about it. Kevin's going to come in with questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to be looking at a lot of text and it'd be boring.
Not the questions I asked beforehand, because they were silly.
Those are silly questions. And then we're going to look at the what was read out in court, and I will read it out. I do want to read out the whole thing. The whole thing is really important, but I'm hoping Kevin will interrupt me so we can talk about sections of it before we move on. So
don't ask me to interrupt you, because that's a red rag to a very childish ball. Okay, I'm going to interrupt you with silly stuff, with drawings
all the time. Right.
Silly.
What I'm referencing here, as you can see on the screen, is guidance on cases involving communication sent via social media. And this is dealing with the particular law that he was tried under. And what they talk about in the first part is they sort of describe the terms and define things. And as you go down, what they say here are relevant particular considerations. This is on page like 2 or something of the document. That they're talking about the hosts and the way that social media works, but then they also talk about it is recognized both nationally and internationally that freedom of speech and freedom of expression applies to any medium of communication, including the internet and social media. And then they go on to like talk about the European Convention on Human Rights, and they quote from that document, which you can read, and they go
just to add some caveat to that. That means that this law or this guidance will have to change relatively soon when we leave the European Union.
Good point. This is that part of it will at least have to be reconsidered or taken out or reframed. They go on to say the right to freedom of expression, given these things, can therefore be restricted when it is shown to be necessary and proportionate. This can include reasons of national security, prevention of disorder or crime, and the protection of reputation or rights of others.
And this is actually the really interesting point. When these fucking idiots, and this is why I can't have them at the adult table when they go on about being free speech absolutists, because it's just not a sensible conversation to have to say we need absolutely unrestricted free speech. Never happened. And I mean that sentence you just read out is an absolutely brilliant summation of the piece, that there are absolutely justifiable curtailments of people's freedom of speech because other people's rights interact with your free speech.
Mm-hmm.
If you commit a crime by speaking, which you can absolutely do in many ways, like you say, national security, so you've got like treason and espionage, you've got slander, libel, perversion of the court of justice, perjury, all sorts of things you can do by just speaking or writing.
They go on to, that's a very good point, which I will hopefully build on as I go forward. Another bit I want to point out here.
I have confidence that you will, Krista.
They write, generally a high threshold is set for before communications will fall foul of the criminal law, and general satirical comments, offensive humor, or provocative statements which might be distasteful or painful to some will not reach that threshold. However, the ubiquitous nature of online speech and the perception by some that it can provide a cloak of anonymity can allow such communications to quickly cross the boundary into inappropriate and indecent and criminal. Individuals cannot be allowed to believe it is acceptable to peddle hatred or make anonymous threats of violence and harm from their computers. Such online dialogue crosses the limits of conventional discourse and may amount to a criminal offense.
Exactly. And this is a point I've been making to them for a long time, is that if they didn't get a hold of themselves and not feel that online anonymity gave them a right to do those things they just mentioned there, eventually the law is going to come crashing down on them.
The approach to be taken by the prosecutors. Now, this is interesting. I'm going to read the first two because they're relevant and the other ones are not so much. Prosecutors should first make an initial assessment of the content of the communication and the conduct in question so as to distinguish between 1. Communications which specifically target an individual or group of individuals, in particular communications which are considered to be hate crimes, domestic abuse, or stalking. 2. Communications which may constitute threats of violence to the person, incite public disorder, or constitute threats to damage property. Right. So then they go on and they have a lot of these other sort of ways of deciding cases, and they make reference to different parts of the law in order to find things, including here you've got hate crimes, stalking, domestic abuse. And then the next one we want to come down to is category 3 offenses and then category 4 offenses. And here is where we're going to get to the stuff that is relevant to the case that we're looking at tonight. Now, the evidential test here, the guidance says, again, prosecutors should consider the guidance available for each of the offenses listed. There's a high, sorry, I'm skipping down a bit. There's a high threshold test at this stage. There are particular factors prosecutors must consider in deciding whether the behavior amounts to a criminal act. It is not the role of prosecutors to restrict freedom of expression, and as a public authority, COPFS cannot breach convention rights. And then again, they quote the Human Rights Convention. Accordingly, there is a high threshold test to be met before such communications will amount to criminal conduct. And in deciding whether such communication is lawful, the context will be important. In the case of Chambers v. DPP, blah, 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 the Lord Chief Justice made it clear that, quote, satirical, iconoclastic, or rude comment, the expression of unpopular or unfashionable opinion about serious or trivial matters, banter or humor, even if distasteful to some or painful to those subject to it, should and no doubt will continue at their customary level, quite undiminished by Section 127 of the Communications Act of 2003.
You've made a very fine point. Don't scroll up just yet.
Yeah.
Americans, notice the correct spelling of the word humor. There you go.
Every day is a school day.
Exactly. The more you know.
It is not sufficient for communication to simply be offensive to constitute a criminal offense. Section 127 requires that the communication be grossly offensive. And then they talk about factors that are taken into account. The context of the communication. Were these situations where people speak privately to each other and then the information is shared? Do they hear, this is important, those who post comments, pictures, videos cannot claim to have a reasonable expectation of privacy or cover the contents of their posts may, in many privacy settings, do not, in fact, curtail the reach of the communication. So what I wanted to say basically is that if someone had actually tried to, maybe this isn't the right one, but they tried to make an effort to make sure the post wasn't shared, that it was meant to be made private and then someone else shared it without their consent and they felt really bad about it, that should be taken, that is instructed, the prosecutors take that into account. But what doesn't count again is prosecutors should only consider action in the category of cases where they are satisfied there is sufficient evidence that the communication goes beyond being offensive, shocking, disturbing, or satirical, iconoclastic, or rude, or the expression of unpopular or unfashionable opinion, even if distasteful or painful to those subject to it, or exchange of communication that forms part of a democratic debate. And this is why people who say, oh, you said this phrase on Twitter, therefore you're going to go to court. Like, no, it's during the exchange of communication.
Notice the leftist bias here. It says democratic debate, not a Republican debate. See what I did there? Purposeful misunderstanding.
Right. And I was reading ahead, and this is the considerations that I was referencing before, but I was in the wrong section because it's like this is more than 10 pages in this document. But they should consider each case on its own facts and circumstances, but some factors can weigh in terms of their prosecutorial action. Did the person express genuine remorse, particularly when it was done spontaneously and expeditiously? Did swift and effective action was taken by the suspect to remove the communication in question or have it removed by others or otherwise block access to it? Those are the two things that they sort of point out that should be taken into consideration to mitigate the consideration of charges. And then it goes on to other things. Now, I didn't know that the law itself made such an effort to protect people's free expression. The law itself actually, in a lot of ways, spends more time saying what isn't grossly offensive. Like all of these things are, protected over here. And then when we get to the sentencing, what you'll see the judge makes reference to is that offensive phrase, not the pug and not the Nazi salute and not the video of Hitler's speech. It's that particular phrase, which is a call to mass murder of an ethnic group. So, yeah. Any points on this, Kevin, before I move on?
No, I think you've actually summed it up rather well.
So, what are your feelings about the law, having heard about it?
Oh, well, it sounds perfectly reasonable to me. I was just going to say, if there's anyone in the chat who has a question about it, I'll be more than happy to relay that to a legal expert.
Not a legal expert. But these documents aren't written in a completely indecipherable language either. Anybody can go and read this, and if you spend a little time thinking about it, you can see what the rules, like what the guidance is and what the thresholds are.
Yeah.
And also how much they talk about wanting to protect freedom of speech and expression.
I can't see any questions.
Okay.
Hang on, what's this one? No, just people. They're having their own conversation. I don't think they're listening to us.
Just keep us on in the background to sort of like natter on, but they're not really listening.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think you can move on to whatever you were going to say next.
Right. Well, the last thing that I wanted to cover before I cover the tropes in Dankula defenders, all of the lame arguments and why I can show that they're wrong now that I've shown you the evidence. This is what was read out, the statement that Sheriff O'Carroll made in court. So I have to I want to have a drink a little bit. Can you riff for a bit, Kevin, while I take a drink?
Yes, I can riff for a little bit. I'm riffing. Look, this is what I'm doing now. I'm riffing and stuff.
You sound like Jermaine from Flight of the Conchords when he tries to freestyle rap.
Yeah, I'm freestyle rapping. There's a picture of New York.
It's sometimes when I freestyle, I lose confidence.
I love those other rappers diss me. They say my rhymes are sissy. Why? Try to be more constructive with your feedback, please.
Who told you that? Did Steve tell you that? What kind of rapping name is Steve, anyway? All right.
It's a fair point.
We're just going to do quote, Fly of the Conchords back, and that's more fun than this. But right, getting back to focused. The statement read out. Section 127 of the Communications Act of 2003 makes an offense to use a public communication network to send certain types of messages, including those that are grossly offensive or threatening. The prosecution argued that by posting your video entitled "Mate, Your Dog's a Nazi" on the internet, you committed that offense.
Come on. Do your best Scottish accent.
You do your best Scottish accent.
No. I want to hear an American try and do a thick Scottish accent and read out that title.
Well, okay, let me just back. World. Okay, your dog's a nut. No, that's too Irish.
Why do you play along with me? It's ridiculous.
Because
you know I was setting you up to fail, and you still did it.
But that's it. I try and fail, and then I know. But if I don't try, how will I know? Maybe I would have done a brilliant Scottish accent. I'm not channeling.
That was never going to happen. Americans can't do accents outside of their own fucking town. Jesus.
So I just wanted, for the historical records now, when people go back to this time period, one of the things that will be on the books forever is the video entitled "Mate, Your Dog's a Nazi."
Yeah. Which is, I mean, actually, If that was like a satirical thing or something, would be a funny title for a video, actually, but it wasn't.
All right. The centerpiece of your video consists of you repeating the phrase, offensive phrase, over and over again as a command to a dog, which then reacts. Sometimes the phrase is variation on the offensive phrase. You recite the offensive phrase in a variety of dramatic ways. The offensive phrase in one form or another is repeated by you 23 times within a few minutes. You use the command Sieg Heil, having trained the dog to raise its paw in response, and the video shows a clip of a Nuremberg rally and a flashing image of Hitler with strident music. You say the video was only intended as a joke to upset your girlfriend, whose dog you used, and nothing more. On the whole, evidence, including your own, applying the law as made by Parliament and interpreted by the most senior courts in this land, I find that you prove that the video you posted using a public communications network was grossly offensive and contained menacing, anti-Semitic, and racist material. You deliberately chose the Holocaust as the theme of your video. You purposely used the command offensive phrase as the centerpiece of what you called the entire joke surrounding the offensive phrase centerpiece with Nazi imagery and the Sieg Heil command, so there could be no doubt what historical events you were referring to. You accepted that the phrase, offensive phrase, was anti-Semitic, though not, you said, when used as part of a joke. You said you used the phrase, offensive phrase, because it was so extreme. You said the video content was horrific, but not when used as a joke. You told a newspaper reporter that the video was very offensive. You intended the video to be as offensive. Yeah.
Time out. You can't say to a newspaper reporter
yes, I know.
that you think it's very offensive, because very and grossly, they're relatively useful as synonyms in this regard. You've just basically given your own verdict, you twat.
Yep. It gets worse. You intended the video to be as offensive as you could make it, and you posted on, again, that was the thing. He made it. Yeah, so you posted it on your own unrestricted, publicly accessible video channel, which on your own description provides offensive social comedy and skits that get people thrown in prison. The evidence before this court was that the video was viewed as grossly offensive within Jewish communities in Scotland, and that such material tended to normalize anti-Semitic attitudes and provoke further unpleasant anti-Semitic messages, and as such, this video uses menacing language, led to great concern.
Well, that is actually a point. If we're going to steelman the situation, which I think is perfectly justified given the amount of straw manning of the situations going on the other side, the point we made earlier about how ironic Nazism is hiding actual Nazism and ironic misogyny is hiding actual misogyny. And it's very difficult to tell the two apart. What you do in using the offensive phrase in question is potentially give that same smokescreen effect to actual Nazism, your ironic Nazism. And I genuinely don't think he is like a fucking Nazi. He's just an idiot. But his idiotic, ironic Nazism or joke Nazism gives that smokescreen and that social easing of using phrases like that and imagery like that and using this as a tool for comedy in a way that is potentially really rather dangerous, considering we've seen the rise of anti-Semitic attacks both in America and in Europe in recent years.
I hear his fans go on and on about him. I never hear them talk about the Jewish people in his community or people who saw this.
They don't care about the Jewish people. That's the thing. They don't. They can say all they like about how they're opposed to Nazis and this. They don't give a fuck. They clearly don't.
And there was someone who testified about watching this video and being more concerned about that offensive phrase being repeated so often than he was about the dog. He's like, I felt bad for the dog, but that phrase made him feel very uncomfortable because it was targeted at him.
Who's this, Sarah?
This was somebody who testified, a guy, a Jewish man who testified at the...
Oh, sorry, you were reading again. Sorry, I thought
Sorry, no, I'm sorry. I was just riffing. But my understanding from what I'd done in the research that there was somebody, they brought somebody in. I think in order to prove this, you might have to have somebody from the community actually complain about it, testified to the effects of it. And yeah, so he was saying that it was the repeated use of the phrase that bothered him most.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's the selective outrage over free speech as well, which I think gives away their intent here. Whenever it's like a Nazi or some Nazi-based shit, let's say, let's add that caveated phrase in this instant, they jump up and down screaming about free speech. When it's like Dick Coughlin or something like that, he gets his channel shut down. You don't hear a fucking word from most of them. When you have me attacked or you attacked, you don't hear a fucking word from them. When you have but anyone on the left, or even like an example I always use is when they go on about Milo being deplatformed or something like that. I never hear them have a problem with like Islamists being deplatformed. Where's your free speech absolutism there? Are you suggesting that there is a level of extreme which is too much?
All right. Should I go back? I don't want to. Yeah. Sorry. I'm gonna rip you from your point way over and bring you over here. All right. So the reactions. So getting back to the text. The reaction by employers in the local area.
Can I just say that was the most polite way of saying "shut the fuck up"?
No, it was fine.
That was very pleasant. Thank you.
I just this is a long text. I want to get through it. The reaction.
You're the one that decided to try and fucking read it when you know you've got an interrupting prick like me on this show.
And I did invite you to interrupt me, so I can't even call you out on it.
Like I said, you waved that red flag at the childish bull, and the bull is waving all over the place. It's ridiculous.
The reaction by employers in the local area suggests that not only Jewish people found this material highly offensive, you say you lost a number of jobs as a result.
That's actually, yeah. This is another thing that annoys the fuck out of me when they're going about, well, you're not even Jewish. What does it matter? Well, I can't be offended because it's, I'm offended as a human being that you use this kind of material as comedy. I don't give a fuck if I'm Jewish. I mean, I'm a trade unionist. They were killed in the Holocaust. Does that give me a free pass now in your eyes, you idiot? Like, it's so stupid. It's so stupid.
To the statement. I also found it proved. Oh, I'm getting it back. Sorry, getting an echo now. So you'll have to mute yourself for a second.
Yeah.
I also found it proved that the video. I'm sorry. Yeah, the evidence he means. I also found it proved that the video contained anti-Semitic and racist material in that it explicitly and exclusively referred to Jews, the Holocaust, and the role of the Nazis in the death of 6 million Jews in a grossly offensive manner. You knew or must have known that. You knew or must have known that the risk of the video, especially with the repeated use of the command phrase, offensive phrase, together with Nazi imagery, was liable to cause gross offense to Jewish people. As a matter of law, the test is not whether the video was offensive, but whether it was grossly offensive. The standard is an objective one in which I must apply the standards of an open and just multiracial society, taking account of the context and the relevant circumstances, applying reasonably enlightened contemporary standards, considering whether the message is liable to cause gross offense to those to whom it relates. In this case, Jewish people. It is a high test, I concluded, applying these standards to the evidence that your video was not just offensive, but grossly so, as well as menacing, and that you knew or at least recognized the risk. The fact that you claim in the video and elsewhere that the video was intended only to annoy your girlfriend and as a joke that you didn't intend to be racist is of little assistance to you. A joke can be grossly offensive. A racist joke or a grossly offensive video does not lose its racist or grossly offensive quality merely because the maker asserts he only wanted to get a laugh. In any event, the claim lacked credibility. You had no need to make a video if all you wanted to do was train the dog to react to offensive commands. You had no need to post the video on your unrestricted, publicly accessible video channel if all you wanted was to annoy your girlfriend. Your girlfriend was not even a subscriber to your channel. You posted the video, then left the country. The video went viral and thousands viewed it before she had an inkling of what you were up to. You made no effort to restrict public access or take the video down.
Well, I have to say that's a new element to the story. I wasn't aware that his girlfriend didn't even know about this until it had gone. So in what ways, actually, because his defense falls apart then? I mean, literally, it falls to fucking pieces on the basis that he was doing it to annoy his girlfriend, but he didn't even show his girlfriend.
Yep.
He posted it on the internet for the world to see before he showed the woman who supposedly this whole thing is the crux around. And yet, so his defense is nothing. His defense absolutely crumbles on that basis. Well, I mean, I'm sorry then. I can't help but feel, actually, I need to I mean, I'm going to have to look in to make sure that that's an absolutely accurate description of the situation. But if it is, then I'm sorry, but his prosecution is probably just then.
That's the conclusion I reached.
Because I mean, if his defense is I did it to a normal girlfriend, and yet he put it on the internet and didn't even show his girlfriend, that's your defense is meaningless, and frankly, is a fucking lie.
So we're going to wrap up here. Yay, we're through it. Finally, before turning to sentence, I should note that although I invited both legal representatives to make legal submissions during the trial about the law on freedom of expression, that was only done to a very limited extent. In the absence of focused submissions on that topic by either the Crown or the defense, all I can say is that while right is very important in all modern democratic countries, the law necessarily places some limits on that right. And then he goes down and basically says you're, guilty. And then also I found it proved on the evidence that it was my finding establishes only your guilt of this offense. It establishes nothing else and sets no precedent. So that's that I found incredibly convincing, that this law, not only in its delivery, in its development, in the guidelines, make a conscious effort to protect offensive, shocking, painful speech even. And in this particular case, the law was very judiciously applied to a high standard of gross offense. It was based in racist language that made people feel menaced, and therefore was not in the public interest. It wasn't a public good. It was actually doing harm in a society, which is why it was criminal. He exceeded the reasonableness of being offensive and going over into racial hatred, and that's why he was convicted.
And not just, I mean, like I say, that change of detail in terms of the not telling his girlfriend, his case falls apart, and the fact that he told a fucking, I imagine in a moment of ludicrous humor,
braggadocio. Is that
exactly
the
word? Yeah, in a moment of.
Oh man, I was trying to be offensive. I wanted it to be the most offensive thing.
That it was highly offensive, or very offensive was the exact phrase, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. Then again, your defense is nothing. Your defense has just crumbled under the weight of the actual situation. You fucking idiot. And of course, you've basically admitted guilt to a reporter who is going to actually tell the world that's what you said because they're a fucking reporter. You moron.
The more I looked into this case, the more I became convinced that this law is just, and in this case, it's reasonable, and in this case was applied justly. I don't see any grounds for appeal. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I just don't feel that there's been a miscarriage of justice, especially with an 800-pound fine, as you know.
I can't see that possibly even getting overturned on appeal because, like I say, the facts don't fit his supposed reasoning, so his case falls to pieces, and he's already admitted it's highly offensive. So you're done.
And you would think that if they were going to set up an appeal, that they would lodge those things on the record with his conviction so that they can already say, we brought this up to the judge before sentencing to take into consideration, and the judge didn't take into consideration. And that's, but anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You finish up and then I'll talk.
No, you've got your
I was going to ask, do you want to hear the really shit arguments I've had to deal with in the last 2 days?
And a couple of people raised the thing about us not using that particular phrase. I think that's going to come up why we've decided to make that editorial decision in this next bit.
Oh yeah, Dankula's fans, if you actually use the words that are in the sentence, they'll accuse you of committing a crime and now being guilty. Basically that
because they're lying idiots. Yeah, so that's why. It wasn't because a couple of people in the chat were saying stupid shit like, "Oh, it's already having a chilling effect on free speech."
no, we're doing it because of shitlords. You idiots.
It's not. We're not saying it because we fear prosecution. Because clearly, the context of this is that we're not actually saying
on the screen. The words are on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. It's the fact that we will be taken out of context by duplicitous, lying pieces of shit.
Yes, who have one name YouTube channels, who are always on the lookout to misrepresent people.
Yeah. I mean, some of those people, I wouldn't be surprised if they're like the actual, not necessarily Dankula himself, but some of the leading YouTubers have like these little sock accounts they like to post their shit in. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, you want to hear the shit arguments I've had to deal with?
Yes.
See if you come to the same conclusion that I came to as to why they're wrong.
Okay.
So one of them is this conviction was bollocks. I'm just saying that they didn't say this because there is no objective standard for what is offensive, and therefore everything is it's subjective. It's a subjective thing.
I mean, there are social norms that you can apply, aren't there? I don't think most laws aren't absolutely objective, or in terms of their application, are they? So I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not certain about that one, but it seems a bit flimsy and a bit like you're trying to essentially let him off on some sort of technicality.
Appeal to science. Oh, if it's not objective, then yeah.
Yeah,
Well, my take on this one is legal concepts aren't objective. The burden of proof is not objective standard that you tip over on a scale. Juries know a burden when something has met the burden of proof in terms of reasonable doubt. Kind of when they see it, it's not something that we can say objectively exists. It's sort of like pornography, when you see it. And in this case, the standards, actually, they laid out the standards pretty clearly. And like I pointed out, they spent a lot of time saying what was not grossly offensive.
Yeah.
So this idea that you need an objective standard in order to do this is, let's say you would need an objective standard to find somebody guilty. No, you need a reasonable standard.
Yeah.
That was my counter argument. I had more time though. I've had like 2 days to think of these.
Yeah, to be fair, exactly. You're throwing me curveballs all over the place.
Yeah. All right. Offense itself is subjective.
Offense. What do you mean?
What people find offensive is subjective. It's not just the standards here. It's just the idea of offense, that one person will find something offensive and another person won't.
Well, obviously everyone finds different things offensive, but it's grossly offensive is the point, isn't it?
Right.
There's again, I mean, it's new information in the sense that I hadn't seen the document you showed me up until you just showed me the document laying out. But they seem to have gone into some depth, as you would hope and indeed demand that legal experts do in this case. That it's not just it being offensive, because lots of things can be offensive. I find certain types of music frankly fucking offensive, but I'm not. It's not legally actionable. The point is grossly offensive.
Right.
And not grossly offensive in the sense that these fucking idiots use the phrase grossly offensive. The actual usage, in the same way that what's it, theory, like it's the typical thing the creationists used to do with, it's just a theory. Well, yeah, but scientists aren't using theory in the way that it's colloquially used. And grossly offensive is just it's defined in the way they did in the document, not in the way some wanker on Twitter wants to define it.
Well, exactly. And in this case, what I wrote back to this person was, you're telling me that you can't tell the difference between the offensive phrase and calling someone Mr. Poopy Pants. And that person wrote back, well, yeah, calling someone Mr. Poopy Pants is name calling, whereas, the phrase is like calling for people to be dead, calling people for people to be killed. Like, exactly. So putting a joke on top of an offensive phrase doesn't make it not offensive. You just recognize grossly offensive versus offensive by saying these two things are different. So clearly your idea that offense is subjective is not the case at all. You recognize grossly offensive when I asked you about it. So that was the retort to that one. Right. Oh yes. He was convicted of telling a joke.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't at all convicted of telling a joke. He was convicted of using insert offensive phrase here, which is grossly offensive. Which, look, you can, if you want to argue that you against the concept of hate speech laws, I understand that. I think that's, as long as you apply that consistently, I think that can be a defensible position. And in terms of the specific laws, I think certainly the British, the way it's interpreted by in England and Wales, it can be too broad at times. But if you're just using the argument it was a joke, no, it's got nothing to do with it being a joke. It really isn't. It could have been a political pamphlet. It could have been anything. It's the fact that it's grossly offensive, that phrase.
what got me the start of the attention, and then because, you know, like they were jerks, I kind of like, you know, who would write more tweets that would irritate them, trolling the trolls, I guess, basically. But I pointed out that when would people have thought about Dankula differently if the media had called him the, you know, the offensive phrase guy instead of the Nazi pug guy? Because in the media, it makes it sound like it was what the dog was doing, and the fact that he had the dog doing things.
Exactly, yeah, which is ridiculous because a dog will raise its paw on command if you give it, you know, positive reinforcement, like the Pavlovian conditioning. If you give it a treat every time you say that phrase, it'll lift its paw or whatever. Like you can train a dog to do anything to any command, basically. So it's got nothing to do with what the dog was doing. If the dog wasn't in the room, if there was no dog in the situation, it wouldn't have changed.
But the media framing in that way.
Yeah, exactly. Because it sounds funnier that way. It sounds like a more enticing headline when you put, you know, Nazi pug, right, as opposed to, you know, offensive Nazi rhetoric or whatever. You know, some more dry, boring thing. It's more sensational to say, oh, it's look at the cute dog. Oh, and the Nazi. Look, it's a funny juxtaposition.
But it helps them feed this narrative that he was convicted for telling a joke.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not true.
And they've even got this again. It's the reinforcing echo chamber of victimhood that they've got going now. They've got this meme now where they say, you know, there's like a photograph of a policeman with, have you got a permit for that meme, or have you got a permit for that joke? But you're never going to get convicted for telling a joke. It's not the joke that's the fucking point here. So stop feeding this victim narrative of, oh, they're going to arrest me for a joke. I mean, Sargon did it. I watched a thing he did on the Dankula case, and he was going on about we don't have freedom of speech in Britain. If that's the case, why aren't you in jail, Sargon? Why are you free to roam the streets and completely unhassled make YouTube videos constantly saying things that, if we didn't have freedom of speech, would put you in jail? It's ridiculous.
Well, speaking of, you know, using jokes, one of the other popular arguments against his conviction was it was just a private joke for his girlfriend.
No, it wasn't. I mean, even before I knew about the detail of him not telling his girlfriend before he put it online, you put it online. That's public domain at that point. Not in the copyright sense. I mean, like, it's out there in the public domain. It's out there for the public to see. The phrase they kept using, which sounds kind of old fuddy-duddy way of saying it, but is the absolutely right legal way of framing it, that it's a publicly accessible video platform. Anyone can view that video. It's not a joke between him and his girlfriend.
And he got 3 million.
If that were the case, he didn't need to film it, or if he did film it, he only needed to show his girlfriend.
Yep.
The fact that he filmed it, put it on the internet without showing his girlfriend, clearly shows that his defense is a lie. There's no other way of putting it.
I think it had 3 million views when it was taken down.
Yeah.
3 million views.
Yeah.
Normalizing anti-Semitism.
Well, exactly, yeah, that's the thing. It is normalizing it because it's as I say, it's adding a layer of at least vaguely plausible, like, oh, it's just a joke type Nazi rhetoric, which masks the actual underlying rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen. Now, I don't know specifically about Scotland whether that's the case, but in Britain we've had a rise in anti-Semitic attacks. In Europe we certainly have, and in America there's been a significant spike in the last ever since Donald Trump came on the scene. What a surprise! Yeah, it's not okay to just say it's a joke, it doesn't matter, because that, like I say, that denies the power of comedy.
How about this for comedy? He did it to make Nazis mad.
Shut up. I mean, it's just that's so obviously, like, facetious, frankly. Yeah, he didn't do it to make Nazis look bad at all. Like, he was playing on the fact that people generally see Nazis as bad for the comedic element of it. I understand that, but he wasn't doing it to make Nazis look bad. What about anything he did made Nazis look bad? How did Nazis look worse for this thing?
Because a pug is not a strong animal. and no, someone actually said this, and so being associated with pugs, modern day Nazis would find embarrassing, so they wouldn't share the video.
I've seen lots of Nazis defending Count Dankula, who owns a pug. So I mean, it's so, again, it's just all facetious bullshit. It's just, that's such an obviously dishonest thing to say.
And the last piece of bullshit I have dealt with, and this is not comprehensive. This is just ones I could remember in a list.
This is the top of the charts. Yeah.
Yes. This law is completely arbitrary. People don't know the difference. They don't know, offensive. People was convicted for being offensive, and that is completely arbitrary. And who makes up, who decides what's offensive?
Societal, like every other law, it's societal norms that dictate what the law actually is. It's nothing.
In this case,
arbitrary. There's nothing arbitrary about it.
No.
You can argue that it's not applied equally, and that's the case probably with every law that's ever existed in any place ever. Not everyone gets convicted of crimes or even prosecuted for every crime. So that's true, but that's just pointing at someone else and saying, "Oh, that boy did it too." It doesn't negate the fact that you did it. If they jumped off a cliff, like, did your parents genuinely not tell you if the other boy jumps off a cliff, would you do it? Did they not teach you that lesson? Okay, it's not arbitrary in the slightest.
Yeah, and again, there are guidelines, and I've given people links to these, and the guidelines very specify what kind of speech is protected, and the judge, or sorry, the sheriff talks about this very high threshold and the community feeling menaced.
Well, exactly, that's the thing. If any honest person takes a look at that document, they couldn't possibly come to the conclusion that it's arbitrary. If they're still saying it's arbitrary, it's one of two things has happened: they didn't actually read it, or they're lying.
I have to say, there was out of, I'm sure, well over 100 different individuals. Maybe some of them had multiple accounts, and so it was one person in 3 accounts. But there was one person who was reasonable. That person ended up like straw manning me and using a lot of red herring fallacies, but they didn't call me names. They didn't insult me. And they were, until they got boring, because they just kept making the same arguments over and over and over again. But his defenders in my Twitter feed have no idea of the things I present them from the sheriff's statement, or actual quotes from the law about how it's important to defend freedom of expression, and that these things don't meet the threshold of grossly offensive, just being iconoclastic, saying something,
I have to say, I'm surprised and slightly disgusted that in all of the reporting on this I've read, nowhere did anyone mention the detail that he didn't actually show his girlfriend, because that literally undermines his entire defense. And you would think journalists would pick up on that and go, actually, that's a rather important detail.
And I don't know when in the trial that came out. So
okay, I will give them that caveat that maybe that came out toward the end or whatever. But
yeah, they weren't sat in the room for the actual every piece of testimony. Maybe, I don't know.
And maybe some did mention it, but I just didn't see those particular articles or whatever. Yes, it's perfectly plausible, but it's disappointing that wasn't mentioned and that wasn't brought to the surface more often, because that, like I say, that's a rather killer point to his whole case.
So when I looked into it, the more I looked into it, the more my opinion became actually more to the side that, like I said, I had no problem steel manning this law tonight, because I do think that it's reasonable and it's not a threat to freedom of speech. And I would imagine Sargon didn't go through the documents that we've gone through tonight, and the people making response videos have not gone through the documents on their videos. We'll find out, I'm sure, in the comments if they did. But
no, he was probably too busy still steel manning the JQ, because that's definitely worth steel manning.
Yeah.
Said ironically.
So, like I said, I don't live in the UK. I'm not leading a mass campaign to keep the law in place, but I felt like it was a one-sided debate, and there are really bad arguments on their side. And when you challenge them with better counter arguments, they don't up their game. They just start to harass you.
Well, that argument that he was doing it to make Nazis look bad, I mean, has actually slightly annoyed me. It's that dishonest. I'm actually genuinely quite offended. Look, that's an insult to the intelligence of the person you're making that argument to. You're basically saying, you're so stupid, I think you'll fall for this obvious bullshit.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know why my eyes didn't roll out of my head reading some of the things that I've. Oh, and then of course there's just the general. You want to police everyone's speech. You don't like freedom of speech. You want to stop people from saying things. Just straw manning.
You say I've never started a petition to try and get certain courses
That's
banned
true.
from universities. I don't know.
I hope people listening have learned a lot tonight and will have a lot to think about. And also, if you encounter defenders of Dankula or Dankula, you will now have a much better frame of reference to know what the law is, the guidelines are, and what specific things were cited in the sentencing speech text to how the sheriff did his reasoning based on the evidence to come to the conclusion.
Well, I have to say it's eased some of my concerns because obviously, I mean, I live in Britain. I don't live in Scotland specifically, but I do live in Britain, to which this law applies. So obviously, I've got my concerns in terms of freedom of speech and expression and all the rest of it. Not that I'm going to be making a Nazi dog video anytime soon, but it's still the law might bite you in the arse in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But having seen those guidelines and having seen the way the case was dealt with and all those the quite high threshold they clearly placed on it. That has allayed many of my concerns there because that seems like a pretty solid piece of legal work.
Well, that was the goal for me in the hangout, so yay!
Cool.
Yeah, and I'll just want to say that people have started pointing me at other instances of people being arrested for posting things and other points of social media. I'm like, but that's not the case I'm talking about here. That being said, I can't speak to every single case because I'm not a British attorney, but I did look deeply into this one. Here's my thought on this: any law can be misapplied. A bad investigation or a bad officer or prosecutor can abuse any law. Am I convinced this is a bad law? Absolutely not. And does that mean that every single case, will always be perfect? No, people are tried and found innocent as well. That's why you have a system. But I don't, like I said, I would concur with you, Kevin. If I was living in Britain, I wouldn't feel the need to change any of my content because of this result.
Well, I had some idiot last night trying to say that we were discussing Holocaust denial, and I was saying, well, it's not illegal here in Britain, and they said, well, actually, under this law that Dankula was Holocaust denial is illegal, and I said, give me one example. Give me one example of anyone being convicted of Holocaust denial in Britain, and of course they couldn't. They brought up one case, but it was of a British person who the German government wanted to extradite under the European arrest warrant for a crime that he'd committed in Germany.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. I've not denied for a second that Holocaust denial is illegal in Germany, and I actually disagree with that, with those laws. I think that's overkill or whatever. Well, that's an unfortunate phrase, but you get the idea. But it had nothing to do with the British government making it illegal. It was the European arrest warrant. They were just fulfilling their obligations under a European treaty. Got nothing to do with British law.
Yeah, so this is not the end of free speech in Britain.
Yeah, it's nonsense. Like I say, if that were true, how would any of Count Dankula's supporters be free to roam and harass you on Twitter? They'd be in prison if we didn't have free speech.
Generally, also just speaking about his supporters who have interacted with me, they aren't interested in thinking. They have this position. And I wonder what the hell have these guys been talking about when it comes to this case over in the shitlord sphere all this time, because there's so much interesting stuff, especially with like the guidelines on prosecution that could be discussed that we went over, but they don't seem...
They don't care, but that's why I call them free speech warriors, because they're not interested in free speech. They're interested in their warped, pathetic imagination land version.
It's all feels and no facts.
Yeah.
All feels.
And they're really surprised when they come up against someone with a different opinion, which I think shows maybe we're not the side that's an echo chamber guy.
Yeah, they're just like, oh my gosh, you have an opinion on this case I disagree with. You must want to end all free speech. Like what? Just block at that point. Like I don't have time to deal with your shit. Because there are 1,000 people like you on Twitter. If I block you because you're an idiot, acting like an idiot, you know what? There are I deal with 100 of you a day. Exactly, I don't need to know you personally. If you're just going to be an asshole.
I imagine there must be lots of sock accounts and stuff going on there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, whenever these things happen, I end up like soft blocking people. I feel like I'm picking fleas off a dog. You know, my Twitter account needs like all of these trolls are just there to say shitty things to me. I'm like, unfollowed.
Fair enough.
So anyway, that was it. That was what I had spent.
We got through all of our topics, which is good.
Yeah, and some pretty heavy stuff, and also some pretty like intellect, like judicially. I'm running out of mouth dexterity. Judicial
It's okay
complexity
if
as well.
American, the English language is difficult for them. It's fine.
Yes, that's it. We're always trying to say something new or interesting in a more interesting way because we have this crisis of confidence when British people speak because it makes us feel inferior.
You missed out the word correctly there.
All right. Well, I think that's the end of the show. So I got to do that thing now where I wrap it up, right?
If you wish, yes, that would be acceptable to me.
Oh, my bit of trivia. We wanted to put in trivia, but we didn't think the start of the show was the good place to put it. And now I've forgotten it, but I can pull it up here on my phone.
For fuck's sake!
Like an hour and 15 minutes ago. That was ages ago. All right. Which one did I pick here?
That's brilliant. We can have a bit of trivia. Oh, I've forgotten what it was.
Oh, I found it here. Which large U.S. city located on the Ohio River was named after a popular Roman statesman? And thanks again to paulsquizzes.com for the question.
On the Ohio River.
On the Ohio River, yes.
Named after a Roman statesman. Oh God. I don't even know which way does the Ohio River go from Ohio.
Well, how many cities do you know in Ohio? I mean, think of sports teams. Come
Columbus. But
okay,
that's obviously Columbus. That's not going to be right, is it?
Yeah. Process of elimination. Go next one.
Ohio. Do I know any cities in Ohio?
Think of sports teams. Use your strengths.
Oh, Cleveland.
Okay, after the president, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So what other sports team?
In Ohio. Oh my God. My mind's gone totally blank.
Reds?
I know. No.
The Reds?
Oh, Cincinnati.
Yes, after Cincinnatus.
Oh,
Lucius
okay.
Quinticus Cincinnatus was a Roman aristocrat and statesman who served as consul and was also dictator and made him a model of civic virtue. He was regarded by Romans, especially aristocratic patricians, as one of the heroes of early Rome. The towns of Cincinnato and Lazio, Italy, and Cincinnatus, New York, and Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States were named in his honor.
Well, I have to say, I wouldn't have guessed Cincinnati on the basis that I didn't know it was in Ohio.
Fair enough.
There you go. If you're going to have lots of cities, people.
And I get points for using a sports reference to get you over the line.
Yeah, well, once you mentioned the team, I knew it was. I could have been here forever. I was thinking, okay, where did the Ohio River go from Ohio? And I was thinking, like, does it go through, like, I don't know, Virginia or something? I don't know.
Very good. Very good. So we get to end on a positive note.
Yes, indeed. Like mentioning Cincinnati. I don't have any trivia for you because as this is an angry hour, which I mean, I'm going to put it in the happy hour fucking playlist. But as it's an angry hour, I thought, well, I've got no trivia, and I've just been watching snooker anyway, so I can give you like snooker stats. That's about it. That's all I've got.
Yeah, snooker stats in and of themselves aren't trivia. Just things that happened in a match aren't trivia. That's all right. I'm going to do that thing where I wrap it up. Hey, you guys, if you enjoyed this content, you can go ahead and support the channel by clicking on the link to my Patreon page. I have a hangout with my patrons once a month and would be really happy to have you join us. Blah, blah, blah. I lost my train of thought. All that's left to be said is that I have been Kristi. The chat hopefully has been well behaved.
No, they have. No, fuck the chat.
People.
Someone guessed Cincinnati right, though. Okay.
All right. Way to go, chat. People in the future watching this, I hope you guys found this is interesting.
People in the future can fuck off.
And Kevin has been a kind of a handful, but sometimes on his best behavior and occasionally useful. So,
ladies, if you're looking for a handful, you know it.
That's what she said. All right, guys. Goodbye from me and goodbye from Kev Kev. Say goodbye, Kev Kev.
Goodbye, Kev Kev.
Excellent. Bye.